Hi everyone, welcome to today's SilverlightShow webinar. My name is Svetla and I'm pleased to introduce you to today's webcast topic and the presenter of this webcast. We have as our guest speaker today, Gill Cleeren. You should know him very well from our previous webinars. He's going to review today 10 Silverlight tips you possibly didn't know so far. So our presentation today will take about an hour and 15 minutes. That's a bit longer than announced, just want to let you know. And after the presentation, we'll have a short question and answer session as usual. It will take about 15 minutes. So feel free to send over your questions all the time during the presentation using the chat option in your webinar panels. And after the presentation, we'll try to reply to as many as possible questions we received. So in case we are not able to reply to all questions you asked, Joe will email a personal reply to the authors of those questions. This webcast is brought to you by Completed. So if you have any technical issues or other questions, just shoot them over using the chat option. And now I'm giving the word to Joe to start his webcast. Joe?
Okay, thank you, Svetla. Hello, everyone, and welcome with this webinar for SilverlightShow. In this webinar, I will be, as Svetla said, talking about 10 different topics, and it's quite a variety that I have for you today. It's 10 different topics, 10 different tips that I hope you don't know yet in Silverlight, so I hope you'll learn quite a lot. Let me start by introducing myself. So my name is Gill Cleeren. I'm a Microsoft Regional Director and an MVP in ASP.NET. And in my daily job, I work as a .NET architect at Ordina here in Belgium. I'm a regular speaker at events, including Dev Days, Tech Days, and I'll be at TechEd in Berlin in 2 weeks as well. I've also a user group that's called Visor BE, and I've written a book, and I'm coming back to that in just a second. More importantly is that I will also be uploading all the slides and the demos of this presentation to my blog, which is called www.snowball.be. Afterwards, if you have a question, feel free to send them over to jill@snowball.be, and you can also follow me on Twitter, and that's @GillCleeren. Now, regarding the book that I just mentioned, so I have this year released my first book. It's called Microsoft Silverlight for Data and Services Cookbook, released by Pact Publishing. And the good news is that I can again give 2 ebook copies of my book away to 2 of the listeners of today's webinar. So simply fill in the evaluation with some valuable feedback, and you can be the winner of one of those 2 ebooks. We'll contact the winners afterwards. One more thing, as Svetla already said, if you have questions, feel free to ask them through the Q&A window. We'll try answering as many as possible in the possible time frame that we have available. If we cannot make all the sessions, or if I don't know one of the questions, I will send you an answer by mail personally. Also, a link to the video recording will be sent to you, so if you have to leave us a bit early, don't worry, you will be able to see the entire video recording afterwards. We will be sending you a mail with the link to the video recording. With that out of the way, let's take a look at the things that I'm going to be talking about. The first thing that I'm going to show is perhaps not a Silverlight 4 feature, it's actually a Silverlight 3 feature, but it's something that I don't see a lot of people actually using yet, and it's behaviors. It's making things possible by encapsulating some behavior on existing elements. Next, we'll be looking at something introduced with Silverlight 4, and is the path list box, and that's something entirely new, making it possible to put items of a list box not simply in a rectangular box, but on a path. In topic number 3 and trick number 3, we'll be taking a look at some specifics around data binding. In the 4th one, I'm going to be talking about something called the iNavigation Content Loader. And the iNavigation Content Loader makes it possible to extend what a navigation application can do, making it possible, for example, to pass in some constructors. In the next topic, I'll be talking about how to debug a service. Debugging services is quite hard, as some of you may already have experienced in combination with Silverlight. Well, there's a good solution on how to get all the valuable service information in your Silverlight application as well. In the next topic, I'll be talking about how you can secure service communication. That's perhaps a particularly difficult point with Silverlight, but it is possible. I'm going to show you a few ways, actually a combination of two things that you have to do to make secure communication possible. In the seventh topic, I'll be talking about how you can leverage ASP.NET membership within a Silverlight application. Next, we'll be taking a look at how we can upload and download other things than just data. We're not always going to be uploading just some data, some strings or some values, doesn't matter. We'll also sometimes encounter situations in which we have to upload and download files. In number 9, I'm going to be talking about how you can partition your application, what are the available options there, and a good solution on how to download on demand. And in the final one, I'll be taking actually a look at 5 different things, and I call that the bag of tricks. Now that it's Halloween, it's a bit more scary, so it's bag of tricks. It's 5 different things that you may not know in Silverlight. So I hope there's a good balance in topics, and that everyone finds something that they don't know. Okay, so I said the first thing that I'll be talking about is behaviors. Now behaviors, as you can see, this girl, she has some bad behavior. She's smoking, she's eating a greasy hamburger at the same time, so that's not very healthy. Now, a behavior in that matter is in Silverlight more or less the same. It's something that can be done by an existing element. And of course, Silverlight elements won't be starting to smoke or starting to eat a hamburger, but they can, of course, do a lot of other things. And what a behavior actually does, it allows us to encapsulate a behavior, something that something can do within a class. It was introduced with Silverlight 3, and many people think it's only related to Blend, because Blend actually has a UI to link elements with a behavior. And in fact, that is not entirely true, because we can simply create behaviors as we want, and we can also attach them via code to an existing element. Okay, so it is something that's, however, it is something that is easy to do and to use from Blend. I'll be showing that in just a second. Now, what exactly is a behavior? As said, it is a class that encapsulates some logic, and a behavior is in fact a combination of two things. In most cases, it's a combination of a trigger and an action. So the action is what has to be done, and the trigger is, like the word says it, it will trigger the action. It will fire off the action to happen. For example, a typical behavior can be, for example, showing a shadow, a drop shadow. So the trigger can, for example, be a mouse over of a specific element, and the action will then show that drop, show that drop behavior. Attaching it is very easy, using Blend or using some code. I'll be showing that in just a second. Now, one of the things, and again, that's probably why many people think it's only a Blend feature, one of the things is that it is easy to allow designers to get extra functionality, because we can simply drag functionality, drag a behavior onto a control via Blend. It is something that allows designers to easily extend their applications with functionality. Okay, now let's technically take a look at how a behavior is built. A behavior is, in fact, a class that inherits from either behavior or behavior in T, so the generic behavior, and we'll often use the latter one. There is also a second possibility, and I'll be showing that in just a second. So the first possibility is actually inheriting from a class called behavior. As you can see on this slide, I have here a class called myBehavior, and that is inheriting from behavior in UI element. So that means that I can attach this behavior on any UI element. And as you probably know, UI element is high in the hierarchy, in the class hierarchy. So this means that this behavior can be attached on many, many elements. What we need to do is override a few methods. We can override the onAttached. The onAttached will automatically be triggered when the element is created and also the linked behavior is created, and actually the link between the element and the behavior is being created. So in the onAttached, what we'll normally do is, for example, say, well, I want to do something with the element that I am linked to. The element that we are linking to is available through the associated object property, and I'm going to show that in the code in just a second. Often what we'll do is adding some event handlers on events of that associated object. For example, think back of what I just said, a mouse over creates a drop shadow. So in this onAttached, we would often say in the associated element, whenever the mouse is going over the element, I want to execute a specific event handler. I can probably derive what the onDetaching is going to do. Indeed, it is going to be executed when the element goes out of scope, and therefore also the linked behavior. And in order not to create a memory leak, we are going to remove the linked behavior. The linked event handlers. I'm going to show it in the sample in just a second. You also have, of course, to reference the expression interactivity DLL, which comes with the Blend, not with Visual Studio by default. Okay, now that we have the behavior, how can we now actually use it? As you can see here, for example, I have created a behavior called myBehavior, and I have attached that through the interaction behaviors property on the ellipse. This is using it from XAML. You can also do it using a drag and drop action within Blend, but that ends up creating the same code. Now that is a behavior. I told in the beginning there's also a different one, and that's the trigger action. Often, in fact, you'll be creating a trigger action instead of a behavior, because a trigger action is like the action part of the behavior, but from outside we can say on which event, which trigger actually, we want to fire off the behavior. So as you can see here, I have created a trigger action, but I can now specify which event is actually going to trigger my behavior. In this case, it's going to be a text changed event on a text box. Okay, so let's take a look at this in code, because if you've never used it, it might be a bit abstract to understand. Let's take a look. So I'm going to open my sample here in Visual Studio. And I have in this sample created two behaviors. In fact, I have created one behavior and one trigger action. People know me, and I'm not a designer, so as you can probably see by my demos, I'm very bad at designing interfaces. So let's first take a look at what the behavior does. And it's a huge button that I have here, so it's clear for everyone to see. I think it's the biggest button ever shown in a webinar. As you can see here, when I hover with my mouse over the button, it is showing a drop behavior. Okay, let's take a look at how I did this. Let me close this down. So in my sample, in my demo here, I have a behavior class, as you can see here. So I have a class called drop shadow behavior, which inherits from behavior. In here I created drop shadow effect. That's also something effects were created with the Silverlight 3, and I'm instantiating that effect within my constructor. That's not really important. Now what happens in the onAttached, I get access to the associated object, which is in this case a UI element, and I specify that on the mouse enter I want to execute an event handler as well as on the mouse leave. In the mouse enter I specify this effect to be the effect of the associated object. That's what creating the drop shadow. In the onDetaching, like I said, in order not to create a memory leak, I am doing the I'm removing the event handlers again. Within my XAML code, I create my button, and the I is reflecting the interactivity namespace, as you can see here. So I'm specifying now an instance of my behavior, of my drop shadow behavior, to be the behavior, to be one of the behaviors in this case of my button. Now I had another one in there. I have in my great looking UI also a rectangle, as you can see here. And when I click on that rectangle, there is another behavior triggering, and that is called the rotate behavior. This is in fact a sample or an example, let's say, of a trigger action. So this class is now inheriting from trigger action. I'm not going to go in this code. This is basically creating the rotate animation, as you can see here. It's creating a storyboard. It's saying it has to go from 0 to 360 in a time span of 1 second. There's nothing special going on there. In the onAttached, I am now not saying which event handler has to trigger some action, as you can see here. I'm simply specifying the rotate transform to be the render transform of the associated object. In the onDetaching, I'm removing that. Now there's something new here, and that's the override of the invoke method. Now this invoke method will automatically be called whenever the trigger is firing. Now where is the trigger in this case? Well, this is the rectangle, and as you can see here, I specified an event trigger here, and I can link it with any event I want. As you can see here, I linked it with the mouse left button up. I could have linked it with the mouse left button down, whatever event I wanted to trigger it. So this is the difference between the trigger action and the behavior. The trigger action, I can actually, from outside, say what will trigger the action. Whereas in the behavior, I have to wrap that within my logic of my behavior itself. Now, as said, so to recapitulate, behaviors are a great way to extend what a control can do, what an existing element can do, and it's also a great thing for the designer to make sure that they can quickly increase the functionality of their applications. Okay, let's continue. Let's take a look at something new in Silverlight 4 that's called the path list box. As you can see here, I've been a bit creative and I've took a path and I put a list box next to it. That's of course not what a path list box is going to be. Now before I talk about the path list box, let me first tell you where the path list box is coming from. With Blend 4, with the Blend SDK in fact, there were also some new controls added to Silverlight's arsenal of controls, including the path list box as well as the path panel. And there were also some new shapes added, making it possible for undesigners like me, let's say, to draw in Blend. Things like an arc have been added, a block arrow, etc., etc. Now we're not going to take a look at those shapes, but we are going to take a look at the path list box. Now what is a list box? It's actually like a box in which we throw some items, and it's going to display them in some rectangle. If you want, you can override how it's going to display them using the items panel, but it is always going to be like a list of items that it's going to show. It's kind of boring, let's say. Now the path list box, basically, conceptually it's the same. It contains the items, but it will lay out the items over a path. And the path can be whatever you want it to be. I'm not going to talk about it a lot. I'm going to show how it works. Let me open Blend. I'm going to open my sample first. Let me do that. So I'm going to open this one in Blend instead of Visual Studio because, of course, again, Blend has a designer, of course, to create path list box. This is expression Blend 4, and after waiting a few seconds before it opens my solution, come on, there we go. So I'm going to start by showing you how to go ahead creating a path list box. So I'm going to add a new item. I'm going to create a new user control. Let me call it user control 4. And I'm going to create a new ellipse, for example. So I'm creating an ellipse here. That was the wrong button. I'm going to remove the fill, and I'm going to make the stroke red and a bit bigger that you see it. So this is now a path. This is an ellipse. I can now right click on that one and I can say path, make layout path. And if you take a look here on the far left, you can see that it has now created something new as a path list box, which is linked to that ellipse. Now the path list box in itself has no UI. As you can see here, this is the path list box. I'm actually now moving it off the screen. It basically is just a container for the items, but that's about it. It's not really visually showing the items. That's going to be the job of the path of the ellipse. Now what I can do is I can now select my list box, and I can now add some shapes to that. And why not use one of those new shapes, for example, the block arrow up. So I'm clicking on that, and just to make sure that you really see it, I'm going to change the color of that to green, and I'm going to keep on clicking that, and you see that it keeps adding items on that path. And you see here on the left, the items are contained within the list box, within the path list box. However, it's showing them on the path. Now, let me move this one to the top, that you see it a bit better. Whoops, that was not what I want to do. I'm going to move this one down so I can see them a bit better. I can play with that path list box for a bit. For example, let's say that as you can see here on the right, we have the properties available, a bit bigger. We can, for example, say that we want to orient our items along the path. As you can see, it's going to outline them along the format of the path. I can also say I want to move them a bit further out of each other, or a bit more closer to each other. As you can see, I can move them all the way to the top. And it's easy to do some basic animations with this. Let me add a quick storyboard here and say on 2 seconds, the padding should be over here, for example, and then we can create some basic animations. I can feel proud that I've created a real animating thing within that plant. Okay, so that's the basic thing that it is. Now let's take a look at some more examples. It is, for example, possible to make sure that the path is not just one path, but it's creating more than one path, and also extending the items over the several paths. I have now 2 paths here, as you can see. Both paths are parts of the path list box. When I make it a bit smaller, you can see that whenever the first one is full, it's going to put the flags on the second one. You can see here, it's now wrapping, let's say. It's not really wrapping, it's whenever one is full, it's going to put the rest in the second pot. You can also go crazy with this, and in combination with some animations, you can use this to create a motion path. I can click on this. It's simply a path list box with one item that is moving along a specific path. And finally, what I'm going to show you as well is it is possible using this approach to make text appear on a path, also even dynamically. So I can say Silverlight, if I type it correctly. As you can see here, it's now automatically updating my text, and it's outlining that text along a specific path that I've specified. So the path list box is a cool thing. It allows you to do some cool stuff with items, and you can go crazy with it. There are a lot of examples available on the web, so I suggest to take a look at them. There are some really nice list boxes around a specific point, making sure that making it real nice to see how what things that you can do with it. All right. In the next thing, I want to talk about some data binding tricks. Now, data binding is something we have already covered quite extensively in a previous webinar. And I've talked quite a lot with people about data binding, and I noticed that many people don't know that in Silverlight 4 some properties were added with the binding on the binding base clause. These properties are the target null value, the string format, and the fallback value. Now, in many cases, to do some formatting before we actually show the value in the UI, what we do is we create a converter. These 3 properties can, let's say, avoid or let's say can make sure that we don't have to write a converter, because they can wrap the behavior of a converter. Let me show you what I mean. The first one is the target null value. If we are binding to something that results in a null value, normally the data binding engine won't show anything. We won't see a thing. However, if we specify the target null value, we can see a specific value that we want. So as you can see here, I'm specifying NA to be the value that's going to be shown if the value is resulting in null. Secondly, the string format allows me to do some basic formatting. Normally I would have to write a converter for this. Here I'm specifying the string format property on my binding. In this case I'm formatting the date using month, date, day, and for year values. And thirdly, the fallback value. The fallback value allows you to show something if the binding should fail for any reason whatsoever. If you are, for example, binding to a value that doesn't exist, or a property that doesn't exist, you won't see a thing again, because again, the data binding engine is forgiving. It doesn't show you what went wrong. In this case, the fallback value will be shown if the data binding fails for any reason whatsoever. I'm going to show them in action in just a second. Let me first talk to you about the relative source. The relative source is something that's inherited from WPF as well, but only in a trimmed down version. There is actually in Silverlight two possibilities to use the relative source binding. It has two possible values, self and templated parent. Self, as the word says it, allows you to bind to the control itself. As you can see there, we have a button, we have a tooltip that has to bind to the content of the button on which it is attached. So I have to use a relative source in this case, because I cannot specify an element binding to bind to itself. I have to use a relative source for this one. Secondly, the templated parent allows me to create two-way template bindings. A template binding is by default one way. So if you are creating a control template in which you have to send data in the two ways, you will need a relative source with templated parent. Otherwise, you won't be able to bind in two ways. Let's take a look at these in action. Let me go back to my sample folder here. I'm going to first show you the binding based ones. Let me first run the sample, and you'll see that on the left we have, as you can see here, we have some formatted dates. They are in the object perhaps with a date time, as a date time. So in this I'm using a string format to format my dates. Let's take a look at that string format in action. Sorry, in code, not in action. As you can see here, the birth date, for example, is specified using the string format. Secondly, this not a customer since shows NA. Now let's take a look at the code. This is in the code behind. I have the no more customer since set to null. The data binding doesn't show a thing because it's null. If I want to show something, normally I have to write a converter. I don't want to do that. I'm just simply saying use the target null value, set it to NA, and Silverlight will show the NA value here as well. Finally, I also have a class called premium customer, which inherits from customer, and it adds the premium customer since property. Now we are binding to a customer, to a simple customer, not a premium customer. So that means that the binding in this case will fail because I'm binding to a property that doesn't exist on this object. The binding fails. However I want to display something, I use the fallback value and set it to NA, and it's going to show me the value NA. Now, before we continue, yes, I want to stop. Before we continue, let's take a quick look at the relative source. So there are two values possible for the relative source, self and templated parent. In case I want to bind to myself, I have to use the self value for relative source. In this case, I have here my tooltip that has to be bound to the button itself, so I have to use the relative source. So you can see here, I have the button, it has a specific content, and I want the tooltip, the content of the tooltip, to also show that same value. That's what we see here. Secondly, this is a control template for a slider. As you can see here, when I drag, the value is going to change. This can be done using a template binding. However, if I want to make sure that this value is also pushed back to the control, to the parent, the templated parent, I can specify value here, and as you can see, the slider moves along. I created a two-way template binding. This is done through the following code. So you can see here, this is within a template. Here it is, control template. And have it within that a slider and a text box. And the text box has to be able to send the value in two ways. So I'm specifying this to be a relative source to templated parent, and I specify the mode to be two-way. This is the only way that makes it possible that you are capable of creating a two-way template binding. So I hope you're still following along quite well. If you have questions, remember that you can type them in the Q&A box. Let's take a look at something called the iNavigation Content Loader. I think you all know the navigation application. It was introduced with Silverlight 3. Silverlight 3, making it possible to do navigation very easy in our Silverlight applications. It's basically nothing more than a frame which can host pages, and you also have the concept of the URI mapper, and that URI mapper allows us to specify friendly URLs in order not to show home.xaml in the browser as the address of the page. Now, why am I telling that? The iNavigation Content Loader allows us to break open the navigation application. Whereas in Silverlight 3, with the first introduction, it was rather closed. We couldn't, we didn't have any extensibility point available. The iNavigation Content Loader is that much requested extensibility point for the navigation application. Normally, what happens with a navigation application? The application gets the URI to which it has to go, and the page will be loaded. If you want to override that process, if you want to do something yourself, you can do so with this specific interface. You can specify whatever you want to do when you get the target URI. This is the interface, so you can see here. It has 4 methods that we have to implement. The can load, as the word says it, checks whether or not, based on the value that we give it, the target URI, checks whether or not the value is, or that the page can be found. That's what it normally does. Begin load, also based on the target URI, starts an asynchronous process to create the page. When it is done, the end load is called, and the load result is passed back to the navigation application, and then load result contains the completely created page. Now we can override this, and we can do whatever we want with the navigation. You can ask yourself the question, now, is this something useful? Is this necessary that we can do that? I dare to say yes. Why? Some examples. For example, in an MVVM scenario, you can use this to, based on the URI of the view, create the corresponding view model. You can create you can create your own implementation of the iNavigation Content Loader to create constructor parameters, which is not possible with the navigation application. You can create something that loads things, perhaps from a service, before the page is created, before the page is shown. You can, for example, handle yourself how the errors are handled. If a navigation to a page fails, you normally get a pop-up, a child window actually, that shows that the navigation has encountered an error. You can override that. You can authenticate the request. Or you can even specify that a page has to be loaded from a different zap. So if the zap is not available, you can write code that downloads that zap first and then shows it, navigates to that page within that zap. All that is possible, and possibly a lot more. Let's take a look at a sample. Now do take a look at the blog of David Paul for this one. He has a lot of demos and implementations of the iNavigation content loader on his site. So I have here two samples. I'm only going to show one because of time constraints. This is like the most basic one that you can have. Normally we have, let me show you the URI mapper. Normally what a URI mapper does, it maps a friendly URL to a specific physical URL. As you can see here, I removed the .xaml from the pages. Now my navigation content loader is going to add that again. This is a pure hypothetical thing. It's not probably a real scenario for which you can use it, but it shows how it is done. So what I did is I created my class, my navigation content loader that I had it implement the iNavigation content loader. I in fact use in this case for this easy demo the default content loader to do all the navigation. So you can see here, this is the default content loader that I instantiate here. I ask it if we in the override of, in the implementation of the can load, if it can load the page, I ask it to do the begin load and I ask it to do the end load. However, there's one particular thing here. In the can load and in the begin load, I say the target URI that we get is going to be this one, /views/home, but it has to be /views/home.xaml. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to override the target URI. I'm going to change it a bit, and I'm going to add the .xaml extension, as you can see here. Within my URI, within my navigation frame, I also have to, of course, now specify that I want to use my navigation content loader for the frame content loader property. Otherwise, it won't know which content loader to use. So I have now completely overwritten what my default behavior for the navigation application will be. This one I'll quickly show it because it's quite interesting. This is a demo that will not use links to pages, but it will use links to types, as you can see here. And so what what the navigation content loader is going to do, it is going to, as you can see in the can load and in the begin load, it is going to check whether or not that type is available, and if it is available, it's going to create that type through reflection. So with that, we have complete control over how the navigation application actually works. I hope it's clear. Let's take a look at the next one. This is a classic one, as you can see. It's not a bug, it's a feature. I'm going to talk about how to debug a service in Silverlight. Now, if you've worked with Silverlight, and I assume most of you have, you probably have encountered this one. The message says the remote server returned an error not found. I actually encountered it today, so it's very hot in my brain. Now, is there a solution in order not to get this specific message? Because this message does not give us any information about what went wrong with the service. Now, the thing is, the status of a service that fails is 500. Internal server error 500. That you all probably know. Now, because of the limitations in the browser stack, a plugin such as Silverlight cannot get back from the browser a message other than 200 and 404. And since it is not 200, the server is returning it as a 404, and that's what's causing the error not found here. Now the solution is actually quite simple. Let's simply change the status 500 in 200, and we can do that using a behavior. I'm going to show that behavior in just a second. And when we write that behavior and when we use that behavior, even faults on the server will be possible to return to our application, and we can check whether or not a specific fault has occurred. That we can do through declared faults. We can also use undeclared faults. I'm going to show it in the demo. The undeclared faults will return everything that went wrong within the service. So if something went wrong, we get the entire stack trace within our Silverlight application. That's possibly the one that you want to use when developing an application. Let me show it in a demo. Okay, let me quickly check that everything is okay here. Yep, seems fine. All right, let's take a look at how we can debug a service. So let me first run the sample. It was developed by a person that doesn't probably know what he was doing. So it's basically a service that returns an error when the search query that I'm doing doesn't find a result. Let me show you. So I'm searching for myself here. As you can see here, I'm going to take a look at the breakpoints in a second. It finds something. Now if I search for something that doesn't exist, as you can see here, there is an error thrown on the service which says that the message is now bad search term. I created that message. Normally we see it here and that's where it stops. However, let me continue, and now I am within my service reference, within the proxy, and I still have, as you can see here on the right, bad search term. I now have my information of my service failing available within my Silverlight application. And also within my application, I get information about the exception that was actually thrown. I can check whether or not the fault is of type fault exception in employee fault. And then I can handle this exception accordingly. Now, how is this done? Well, the first thing that I did was I created something called a Silverlight fault behavior, which is a service behavior. The Silverlight fault behavior, I didn't write myself. I found it on MSDN. It is there. You can use it. I'm not going to show you all the code. Basically what it does, it's changing the status code if there is a fault to status OK, as you can see here. So this makes the message at status 200. Within my configuration, I specify this Silverlight false, and I use it as the behavior configuration. And I can now, in my service, create false, as you can see here. When I now create my service reference within my Silverlight application, these faults will be available on the client side as well. As you can see here, I have them available, and I can capture them within my Silverlight application. And this really improves the way that allows you to find errors with your service instead of having to look at a Fiddler window. Of course, I always use Fiddler for this, of course, but it allows you to handle your exceptions a lot more gracefully as well. I think this one is really one that can save you some gray hairs. It certainly did for me. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is how we can secure communication when talking to a service. Now let's think about what Silverlight allows. Now Silverlight does not support the WS HTTP binding, which is the default for WCF. Instead, it defaults to the basic HTTP binding. That means that if we want to secure the communication, we have to do it ourselves. Now, what do we have to do to secure the communication? In fact, we have to do two things. What you have to do is, as well as check the oh, sorry, something went wrong here. Okay, it's back. Sorry. So what we have to do is we have to check for, we have to make sure that the information that goes over the line is secure, and that we can do using SSL. And secondly, we have to make sure that our services also will check that the person that's logging onto them is authenticated to get the information. Let's first take a look at SSL. SSL, in fact, is entirely supported by Silverlight. Silverlight can communicate over HTTP and HTTPS. It's basically one letter that we have to change. Let me show you. This is basically an IIF thing. So this is my IIS, and I am going to start the website that I have to use here. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Sorry. So I'm going to stop the default website. I'm going to start this one. This site has in its binding HTTPS enabled. I have created a certificate myself. This is nothing specific for Silverlight. Now within my Silverlight application, and that's going to be this one. Within this application, I am now going to communicate with the service over HTTPS. One thing that I have to do, and somebody asked to increase the font size. I hope it's big enough as we have it now. So this is using now, sending its information over HTTPS. That's the only thing I have to change here. Of course, in the client configuration, there's also going to be HTTPS used. You see here, it's not using the internal server of Visual Studio. That doesn't support HTTPS communication. So I have to use IIS itself. And if we run this sample now, we will communicate over a secure line. It's going to be SSL that we use here. I hope you can see at the top. I cannot increase this. It's using HTTPS. And as you can see here, this is quite some secret information. Whoops, we don't know where we put the nukes. So we want this information to be encrypted. The second thing that we also might want to do is make sure that nobody else knows that we don't know where we put our nukes. Now, with what we have now, we aren't doing that, because the service is simply a service that's open for everyone. Everyone can connect to it, and it will return the information to whomever is connecting to it. Now, this would require message-based security. What I mean by that is we have to include within the message a username-password combination. So what we have to do is we have to make sure that whenever we send the request, include the username-password in the service. In the message. Let's take a look at how we can do that in Silverlight. Let me go back to my IIS first, and you can close this one down now. Let me go back to my IIS. I have a different website for that, and that's going to be this one, I think. So let me open the sample for this one. So this one is now going to make sure that everyone that is connecting to the service is going to have to authenticate with that service. Let me first show the sample in action. So I'm checking here. I'm going to try to launch a missile, and I don't know the password, but I'm going to try anyway. And let's try launching it. Whoops, the credentials were wrong. It's not doing anything. So the launch has failed. Now, if I do know the password, I can actually launch the missile, and it says boom, as you can see. All right, now let's take a look at how I did that. So this is my configuration of my service. I hope you can all read it. First, I have to include the service credentials element, and I'm specifying for username authentication that I'm going to use a custom method here, and the type that I'm going to use to do this validation is called the username password validator type. That's a class that inherits from username password validator, and it has the validate method passing in username password that I have to override. And in here I can do whatever I want. I can go to a custom database, I can do perhaps ASP.NET membership clause, I can do whatever I want here within this validate method. So all types of validation are possible. Now the second thing I have to do is this actually doesn't trigger the validation, the check yet. Here I have to specify within the binding that I'm going to specify a username password combination with the message, and so that my service has to check whether that username password combination is there, and if it is there, if it is a valid username password combination. Within the service call from my Silverlight application, I specify the username property and the username password property. And so with this, in combination with the SSL, I have actually created something that is, in my opinion, safe, because I'm, on one hand, encrypting the information. On the other hand, I'm making sure that no one can connect with the service that's not allowed to do so. So I'm sending over username and password, but that username and password is again encrypted using SSL, so that's safely sent over the line as well. All right, let's take a look at the next tip that I have for you. How can I leverage within my application the ASP.NET Membership API? Assume that you already have an ASP.NET site and that users are authenticating with that site over using the ASP.NET Membership. That was something that was introduced with ASP.NET 2.0. Now, you want to move that site to Silverlight, perhaps the entire site, or perhaps only partly. So what you would do then is, or want to do perhaps, is move the users so that they don't have to re-register or asking you a password, etc., etc., so that we can reuse the data, so the users' data within our new Silverlight application. Well, there is a solution for that, and that is available through the application services in ASP.NET. Now, what are the application services? They were introduced with ASP.NET 3.5 as something that exposes the ASP.NET Membership API over a service layer. At that time, it was mainly aimed at making it possible to log in over ASP.NET AJAX, so from the client side. So that therefore they created a service layer. But of course, this can also be leveraged within Silverlight, and it's really easy to use. The only thing that you have to do is create an SVC file and enable the services. There are in fact three that are open. That's the authentication, the profiles, and the roles. Those are the three available application services in ASP.NET. So you can not only log on users, you can also use the profile information available within your ASP.NET. Let us take a look at this in a sample. Let me go back to my folder here, and let's take a look at tip number 8. So we are actually quite good on time. We're going to make it in about 15 minutes, so that should be good. Let's take a look at the sample in action. So this is a banking application, not a real one, of course, and I'm going to log in. And I'm going to log in using a username password combination. I am going to log in now using the application services. I have logged in with an account that is created previously in ASP.NET in the membership database. I am now logged in as a normal user. As you can see, I also have the ability to change my preferences. I can say, well, I want this to be blue. So this is now stored in my profile information within the ASP.NET membership. Let's log out and let's log in again as another user. Let's log in as an administrator. All right. And as you can see, it is now a different color because it downloaded that information, that profile information from the other user. And it also gave this user more rights. It has more functionalities available because he's in a different role. Now, how do we actually do this? Well, the first thing that you have to do is for each service that you want to use, create an empty SVC file. Empty, just this line has to be in there. This line refers to the functionality within ASP.NET. I don't have to write the code myself. It is already available within ASP.NET. So I don't have to write it. I'm simply referring to it. This SVC file serves as like the endpoint for services, for client applications to connect with that service. Secondly, I have to enable the services. First, I have to create the endpoints for the services. And secondly, I have to make sure that they are really enabled. As you can see here, I'm specifying the authentication to service to be enabled, the role service to be enabled, as well as the profile service to be enabled. From within my Silverlight application, as you can see here within my Solution Explorer, I can then create service references to each of these services, and I can use them like I would use a normal service. As you can see here, I'm going to show you only the login. So I'm instantiating a proxy. I'm going to put it on the second line. I'm specifying what has to be done to login, calling the login method, and I'm specifying the callback for the login completed. The profile as well as the role information is similar, so I'm not going to go there. We can take a look at the code in the sample downloads afterwards. So this makes it really easy to oops, something went wrong again. So this makes it really easy to leverage an existing ASP.NET membership database within a Silverlight application. All right. The next thing I want to show you, and that's the last thing actually, before we take a look at the bag of tricks, is how to upload and download files from within Silverlight. There's going to come a time that you simply are not going to be uploading just a string of data, but you're going to encounter situations where you have to upload an entire file to a service. I had that situation happening to me for a customer for which we had created a client-side image editor, actually like a desktop publishing application. And so the user was able to create an entire flyer or folder on the client, and then that, when it was finished, had to be uploaded to the service. So what we had to do is we had to upload from Silverlight a file. The file on the client is a physical file. What we needed to do is actually convert this into binary data, send it to the service, and then reconvert that back to a file. Let me show you how this is done. Let me open my sample again. Let's run it first. So I'm going to upload a file. It's a very basic application. I'm going to select a picture here. I have some funny pictures available here. Let me perhaps upload myself once. Let's try. The upload has succeeded. Let's now download that file again. So it's now downloading that file, not as a real image, but it's downloading it as a stream of bytes, of binary data. All right. How is this now done? Let's take a look. Let's first take a look at the service. Within the service project, within the website actually, I have a data contract that has a data member of type byte array. This is what I'm going to put my binary data in. So I'm going to upload and download my data within this byte array. Then the no, don't need this one actually. Let's take a look at the implementation directly. What happens now when I'm calling the upload? So a client is uploading something, is going to be uploading one of those picture files. On the service, what happens is I get in a stream of binary data. I have to convert that back into a physical file. That's what I'm doing here. I'm checking if the stream is not, if the name is not empty, and I'm going to create a stream to a file that I have to create on my service, on my server. I'm sorry, and I'm creating a binary writer to that file stream, writing the bytes of the picture stream to that file. The download is similar. I'm going to convert my my image into a stream of bytes, and I'm going to send that down the line. One other thing I have to do is I have to change the message size, because by default this is way too small to upload or download a file. So I'm going to set this. In this case, I set it to 2 megabytes. I've heard of people that set it a lot bigger. That's not an issue. but it's basically a security measure that allows you not to upload too big files, too large files. In this case, I set it to 2 megabytes. If you have larger images, of course, you have to increase this as well. Sorry. Now on the client, let's take a look at what the upload is doing. So I'm creating a stream to that file that I selected within my OpenFire dialog. Silverlight only gives me a read-only stream to that file, so I can capture that stream to get the bytes out of that image. That's what I'm doing here. I'm creating a byte array with a specific length, creating the file name, and finally I'm placing those bytes within that stream. Then I create the picture file, which is of course available because of the fact that I created a service reference, and I'm putting those bytes within the picture stream property. And with that, we are capable of doing uploads and downloads from physical files from and to a service within a Silverlight application. All right. That brings us with tip number 9 already, so we should be good regarding the time. And that is called splitting your zap. Now, if you've looked at the previous webinar regarding MEF, you may already know this. Now, one thing that I really hate is when I start working with a Silverlight application as customer, as user, I don't want my to have to wait, let's say, 2 minutes before the application is downloaded. If the file is perhaps, or the zap file would be like 30 megabytes or so, because they included a lot of images, I don't want to wait so long. A better solution is bringing down the initial download size. So the first download should be small, and then download the rest of your application on demand. There are several ways to do that. Normally what you would do is you can split your zap into several smaller zaps and create therefore something like a shell that is like the shell of the application, the hosting application, let's say, and then on demand download when a user wants to do some user management, download the zap that contains the user management, download the product management zap only when the user wants to do some product management. So download the zaps on demand. Partition your application. It's going to create a lot more happy users. There are several ways to implement that. I talked about the iNavigation content loader today, and that is one way to do this. We can create links that contain not only the XAML that we want to navigate to, but also the zap that we want to navigate to. And in our own iNavigation content loader, we would then have to create some code that would check whether or not the zap is already available on the client. If not, download the zap and then navigate to the XAML. If it's already available, well, then simply navigate to it. This is also available with Prism, or possible with Prism. And this is, of course, also available with one of my favorites, and that's the Managed Extensibility Framework, or simply MEF. Now, MEF, as said, we took a look at MEF in the previous webinar. If you have missed that, now MEF really comes down to a system in which parts are created. And a part is basically something that exposes itself or imports another part. So imagine that you have your application that you're building today, and that has to do some logging. Then your logging engine can become a part because it's exporting itself as a part of type logging engine or whatever. And your application becomes a second part because it will import one of those logging engines. Now MEF's task is actually matching those imports with exports. It has a huge catalog of all the available parts. The catalog can be a collection of other catalogs, but ultimately they contain parts. So basically, MEF takes a look at your application code and sees that some part requires an import, another part is exporting itself. So that's how it's doing the composition. Now that's one thing what MEF can do. A more important thing when it comes to partitioning your zap is recomposition. If over time you are downloading new functionality, MEF can plug that in to the composition and make those parts available to you. And this is done through something called the deployment catalog. And I think that is, in my opinion, at least, the most important functionality of MEF. Apart from being a simple IOC, it can also be used as a system that allows you to download functionality on demand, simply create more than one zap, download those zaps on demand, and when you have to use them, download them within your running application. MEF will take a look at the parts that are available in it and make those parts available within your application. Now let me quickly show you a sample of this in action. So I have here something called the MEF Marketplace, and I already blogged about this one as well. This is a great sample of showing how I can bring down the initial download size of my application and download functionality on demand, because in fact I don't know what is going to be available. Let me run it first. So this is my MEF Marketplace. I assume you all know the concept of a marketplace. It's basically showing me applications that I have purchased already, and then these are applications, these are separate zaps that are going to be downloaded whenever I need them, whenever I have to use them, using MEF, of course. So I can say, well, load me the Flickr application, or load me the Facebook application. All right. So I'm going to quickly go over this one. As said, I have a blog post on my blog that explains entirely how this is done. So it all comes down to MEF making sure that the parts are available when you need them. Everything is using an interface. So all the applications have are implementing an interface called Marketplace application, defining a string, a framework element, and a second framework element. This is the icon, and this is the view that I want to load. All right, let's take a look at, for example, the Hello World application. It is implementing this interface, and it is exporting itself as an iMarketplace application. In turn, it is importing an icon and importing the Hello World view, two classes that you can see here as the code behind of both the Hello World view and the icon zap. They are also exporting themselves. MEF is going to do the matching here. All right. So this is now a separate application. I made sure that I have a separate application that I'm using when I need to use it. I'm not going to download this. In this case, I'm downloading them in the background, but I can also make sure that MEF's only downloading it when I really need it. We can see here on the right, this application is a separate zap. Now, how do I get that zap? Within my Silverlight application, where is it here? I have an aggregate catalog. That's one of the catalogs that are available in MEF. That is now going to say, well, I'm open to receive other catalogs during the run of the application. I have a service that returns me the applications and the zap file names. In this case, that's of course only for demo purposes. And when my application is running, I use the deployment catalog, something also added with MEF, to download the zaps that I need. I add the deployment catalogs to the aggregate catalogs and then ask MEF to download those zaps on demand. My initial download is very, very small. All the rest is downloaded on demand. And within my application, I now have a observable collection of iMarketplace applications that has the allow recomposition set to true, making sure that in the background they are, when downloaded, placed into this observable collection, and that's why I am seeing them appear in my UI. All right, so let's take a look at the final thing that I wanted to talk to you about, and that's my bag of tricks, to stay a bit in the atmosphere of Halloween. The first thing I wanted to talk to you about is assembly portability. I assume you, I assume you all know that Silverlight applications cannot reference a non-Silverlight assembly. Visual Studio won't allow that. Vice versa, you may also know that a Silverlight assembly cannot be referenced from a .NET application. Now, since .NET 4, in fact, since Silverlight 4, we can, however, reference from within a .NET application a Silverlight assembly only if it is using those referenced assemblies. It's not using any other references. This is something called assembly portability, making sure that you can use a Silverlight assembly within a normal .NET application, but only if you use only those things like MS Core Lib and System Core, etc. Secondly, the caret brush. The caret brush, I assume you all know what a caret is. It's like the blinking thing after where you can type and where you can start to type. In previous versions of Silverlight, and I think this was added with Silverlight 3, I'm not really sure about this one. It's getting hard to know what was added with which version. With previous versions, this was only available in black. You couldn't change it. Now you can say, well, why would I want to change it? If you have an application that has a black UI, you won't see the caret, of course. You won't see it blinking because it's all black. Now in Silverlight, there is now a caret brush that makes it possible to, as the word says it, brush the caret. Make sure that the caret has a different color. As you can see on my slide there, it can be blue or it can even have gradient. I can quickly show that if you want. Let's take a look at the caret brush in action. It's of course a magnificent sample application. So let's run it. As you can see, I hope you can see it, increase it a bit. I have now a gradient caret brush blinking over there. I'm going to show you the code, of course it's not needed here. Okay, number 3 of 5, we're almost there, is the combo box, a powerful combo box. Now, by default, the list box and the data grid support virtualization. Now that means that these controls are only creating the items that you can see, and they create them on demand when you start scrolling. That is virtualization. Now this is by default for the list box and the data grid enabled in Silverlight 4. However, the combo box does not have virtualization enabled by default. And we can, however, create this using the virtualizing stack panel. And let me show you the difference, because there is a huge difference in this one. That's this demo. Let me run it. I'm creating a few 100,000, I think I'm creating 200,000 items. In a normal combo box, this is the effect that you get. It's crashing. It's not really crashing, it's doing its work, but it has to create 100,000 of elements. I'm going to stop this because this will keep on hanging. If I now do the same, using a virtualizing stack panel, as you can see, there are all my items, and it's creating them on the fly. I simply did this using the virtualizing stack panel, setting the virtualizing stack panel as the items panel for the combo box. And the two last ones, performance. You may not know this, but Silverlight also has a frame rate counter on board. Within your object tag, in which you define your Silverlight object, in your HTML that is, you can use the enable frame rate counter property and set it to true, showing you this counter that you see at the bottom there, showing the frame rate and the GPU memory. Also, Silverlight has an analytics class that makes it possible to show the CPU load, both from the current Silverlight application, so that's the average process load, as well as the total CPU load, the average processor load. That makes it possible to create Silverlight applications that show you the use of the processor.
And finally, the list box. We already talked about the path list box. The list box is very versatile. It can also change its items panel. So if you want a horizontal scrolling list box, that is easy to do. Simply provide a new items panel, for example, a stack panel with its orientation set to horizontal, and you have a new list box available. Let me show it to finish off. It's my Team Foundation server not being available, it seems. So as you can see here, I have a horizontal list box. This is still the behavior of a list box, but I have made sure that all my items are next to each other. How did I do that? Let's take a look quickly. I simply wrote a new a new items panel template for the items panel, in this case a horizontal stack panel. And so with that, I am through my tips. I hope you enjoyed them, that you really learned something new here. And if all goes well, we can now take a look at some of the questions. I think we have about 10 minutes time still. So if I can see the questions.
Yeah, just so we got a few questions. I'm sorry that one of them was sent a bit earlier. This was by Chad Boyer. You can see that what happens if there are more items than locations in the path. So this relates to an earlier tip.
So Chad is indeed asking what happens if the items, that's I assume with the path list box, if there are more items than what the path can show. Well, they are simply hidden. You may have seen, I think when I did it with the arrows, they simply start disappearing. However, you can there's also the wrapping property, which makes sure that if they go around, that they start at the beginning again. So there is some configurability available there. But if they're not going to start showing, for example, with the circle that I had, they're not going to start showing again in a second circle or something. That's not going to happen by default. So normally they disappear if they don't have space. Yeah. Then somebody is asking to make the font bigger. I hope I did that. Somebody is asking, and that is Alex Sorokoletov. He's asking, what can we do to recommend? What do you recommend to debug a binding, so a data binding? Well, I actually can be very very short in that one. Basically, as far as I know, the only thing that I do is actually taking a look at the output. There is not much to see apart from that in debugging data bindings. There is no other way that I know of to debug data bindings currently in Silverlight. There's a question of Peter Benchop. He's asking, should I use SSL in combination with the ASP.NET membership? I can of course agree with that. Yeah, that is of course, in this case I didn't do that because I did a demo, but of course you can do that. That is of course recommended. I can assure you that. How can I solve navigation? Yeah, someone is asking here, and that's Tony Clement, I don't know, is asking how can I solve navigation with the MVVM pattern, I assume, with the iNavigation content loader. So yeah, so that is, I really didn't show that because yeah, it requires quite a bit of work to do. So as you remember, the iNavigation content loader allows me to override the navigation, and it's all happening based on the target URI that I'm getting. So assume that you have a link that refers to another view in an MVVM scenario. What you can do then within the begin load is, based on that target URI, create the view model and pass that in to that view that you are creating as well. So you are then creating within your iNavigation controller both the view and the view model. So I'm then in my begin load creating the view as well as the associated, let's say, view model, and so I have them automatically linked with one another. Yeah. I hope that is what you are asking here. So let me just quickly remove the questions that I already did. The SSL one I also did already. This one. There is a question, can we directly save a picture from a Silverlight application to a database using a service? Well, of course you can. I assume that you would like to save that picture as a stream to a database. I can fully see me doing that, because basically instead of now creating the file, the physical file again within the service, I can then send that to a database. What I actually wanted to show you is that when I'm going to upload or download something other than data, so physical file, I have to use the I have to use a byte array, and so of course on your server side, within your service, you can do whatever you want with that byte array. You can indeed create a new file from it, or you can also save it from a database. And the other way around also, if you have an image stored in your database, simply create your service that it returns that byte array reading it from the database. So there is, wait, let me remove this question. There is a specific binding question. I'm going to try handling that by mail. It's a question also by Abhinav. I'm going to try that by mail because that is a bit too not really sure what this means, so we can take that one offline. And there is one more question. So I have to check what this question is. So leveraging on ASP.NET application, is a session created so I can check my server side? Well, by default, this is actually still using what ASP.NET does, because the request goes in to the service as a normal ASP.NET request. So the question is indeed, can I, is a session created when I'm using ASP.NET authentication? I assume yes, because there's also a cookie created here, and that cookie can also be used later on to log on again. So that is all the questions, apart from that one question that I'm going to take offline. So Svetla,
we have one final one. I just got it by Abhinav.
Yeah, I see it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So Abhinav is also asking, the default is basic HTTP binding. How can we use different bindings of WCF in Silverlight? Well, yeah, that's a bit of a disappointing answer that I have here. So by default, WCF uses the WS HTTP binding, and you probably know that. Silverlight cannot work with the WS HTTP binding. It always has to use the basic HTTP binding. So therefore, you cannot benefit from the extra things that WS star enhancements give you, so enhanced security and stuff like that. You cannot use that with Silverlight 4 when communicating with a service. So the answer is there indeed. The only available option here is the basic HTTP binding, and that's also why I showed today's example with the security to make sure that we also can do secure communication with the service within Silverlight. So I hope that answers your question. That was, I assume, the last question, Svetla?
Yes, that was the last one. So thanks, everyone. So it seems we have a few questions remaining, which Joe will reply to by email to the authors. So thanks for joining today's webinar. please remember to fill in our post-webinar survey. It appears right after you exit our webinar, so we expect your feedback.
And you can win a book with it.
Yes, that's right. So we will announce the winners in a couple of days when we get our feedback. All right, so thanks, Joe, for joining today's webinar too.
I hope
have a good day and night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.